Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and everyone and everything in between. Welcome to the Stay Positive podcast. I'm Alex.
I'm Pete.
And so today, Pete, I want to talk to you about something that's been on my mind recently. So I've mentioned multiple times in previous episodes that I'm a bit of a connoisseur for video games. I really like them. I see them as an art, and I'm very invested in game development and game design. And so recently a new game came out. It was called Elden Ring, and it was made by a developer who I really love. I love all the games that they've played all the games they've made previously. So for those of you who are familiar, games like Demon Souls, Dark Souls, Bloodborne, Sekiro. So all of those games, not flawless, they're not, but I really like them. I really, really like them. And their newest one, Elden Ring, it also directed by the renowned game director I forget his first name. Miyazaki is his last name. And it was co-written by the Game of Thrones guy, George R.R. Martin, I believe is his name. And so really good. It was released like a few weeks ago, maybe a week or two ago, and it sold really well, like insanely well. And the games that Miyazaki made after Dark Souls have always been pretty good when it comes to sales, but this one like blew everything out of the water. It shattered so many records, which is funny because it's a single player game, but that's a conversation for another time. So this game, really popular. So one thing about the games Miyazaki makes is that they are kind of hard. They're
Mm-hmm.
kind of on the hard side, and there's no difficulty select. There's no easy mode, essentially. When you buy the game,
Mm-hmm.
that is the game, and that's the end. It also has a very, very minimalist user interface and user experience. They don't give you much of anything. They just give you your character, a few items on like the bottom left or bottom right side of the screen, your health and magic meter, and that's pretty much it. Now, Pete, I want your opinion. Do you think that games should have like a difficulty select all the time, or that this kind of design, what do you think is okay? And you can ask me any questions if you need any more details.
I think it depends on the game.
You think that's the professional answer, right? That's how it should be. But recently, a few other developers. So there was another game that released 1 week prior to Elden Ring. It's called Horizon Forbidden West, I believe. And I want to preface, before I go any further, I want to say this. One, I don't condone any bullying, especially not in the cesspool that is Twitter. I know it's a breeding ground for that stuff, but to anyone listening, please don't go out and like start a fight or join a fight. You know, this is just purely professional talking right here. And second, I slightly disagree with the things that they've said. So they made comments saying, I can't tell if they were being coy, if they were being sarcastic, or if they were actually being pretty petty. But obviously, Elden Ring sold more than the game that they made. And these developers said something along the lines of, I guess ratings, because it got really high ratings. I guess rating reviewers, they don't take into consideration user interface design or level design or map design, and a few developers like hopped in and like, from my perspective, it sounds like they're mocking the game. Like I said, I don't know these guys personally, and I want to emphasize this is a handful of developers. So I'm willing to bet the majority of the other developers and coders and artists, they have more professionalism. They weren't like ranting or making petty comments on the internet. But, I think it's a good discussion. So they basically said that because Elden Ring is minimalist and because it doesn't have a direction, it was a game designed around going on an adventure. in the most pure form you can imagine. So getting lost, not knowing where you are, remembering landmarks, all that stuff. There's no pointer. There's no like guidance as to like where you're supposed to go. There is no map. Like you don't have a map on the side of the screen, a mini map to help you like pay more attention to that stuff. There's no like telegraphs, because there was a running joke for like the last 5 years that all the ledges you can climb on had like paint on it, white paint, which is
Hmm.
that's very video gamey. That's because it's like, why is there white paint on every single ledge that you can specifically like climb on? And in other words, a lot of games they kind of baby you. They give you instructions, they tell you what to do, they point you in the right direction, they telegraph almost everything. And Elden Ring, the game that released, doesn't do any of that. It literally just plops you
Hmm.
in the middle of nowhere. You don't know where you are, you don't know what you're doing, and it's like, go, play the game. And when I play, and this is a kind of a staple in all of Miyazaki's games, because when I played Demon Souls for the first time, it was a similar thing where it's like you don't know everything about this world beside like the bare minimum. The starting narration is like to get you somewhat acquainted for what's going on, but after that, that's it. You're in the game. Now play the game. And these developers on Twitter, they made these comments poking fun at how highly rated this game is, even though they kind of don't like how it was designed, how there's nothing helping the player beside their own wits and their own memorization, their own skill. There's nothing guiding them on where to go. There's no button prompts. There's no hand holding, which is
Hmm.
in the game world, this is called like get good, where you have to just get good at the game. There's no excuse. If you're not good, it's your fault. It's not the game's fault. And
Tough luck for you.
some people really don't like that, which has led to, I hope to believe, is a small group of people. It could be larger than I think, but there's a small group of like video game journalists and developers who think that easy mode should exist. That like if a game is hard, then it is the developer's responsibility to just cater to everyone. What are your thoughts on that? That a developer needs to just try and cater to everyone versus catering to their target audience. It's tough.
This honestly, this approaches the philosophy of games, right? Because let's think about what a game is. It's just a simulation of some sort of event that you want for purposes of entertainment.
Yeah.
And in order to do that, I suppose you have to make whatever problem that is being solved during said simulation hard to attain so as to give it some sort of value or reason for the person in the simulation to keep going. I don't know if it's purposeful for games to make an easy difficulty just so that people can continue playing them. So this is funny because, yeah, we know that I'm not a gamer, but for some reason or another, a couple of years ago when that God of War,
The remake.
the first of the Ragnarok series,
Nice.
yeah, when it came out, I watched the whole walkthrough because I'd heard so many things about it and it was really entertaining. But the reason is, it wasn't meant to really be a game. It was meant to tell an amazing story, and they did it. Fantastic. I honestly, if it was a movie, I would rate it a 7 or 8 out of 10. Fantastic story. But that's a different purpose. If you're trying to play a game for the sole goal of reaching point B from point A, if you're trying to solve a problem, if you're trying to do something, I don't see why. It makes no sense to me why you should make it easier, because then it literally defeats the purpose.
I couldn't have said it better myself. A lot of games, no, because you're right. The God of War game, Last of Us 2, Red Dead Redemption 2, these are all AAA games, so which means like games made by really big companies, and they really seem to be leaning in hard in making games more like movies. And it's so weird because, like you said, as a movie, some of these games are phenomenal. The graphics are insane, the voice acting's insane, the music and music direction and sound effects, everything is so good. But like, how is it as a game? And some of these games kind of struggle in that regard, and it makes it
Yeah.
so bizarre because that was honestly the allure for the Souls games, for the games Miyazaki made, is that they felt like a game, but also they felt realistic. In real life, life isn't a movie. You have to kind of go about your day. You have to. It's hard to explain. So
I don't know, man. My life's pretty much a movie.
we're all the protagonist of our own simulated movie,
Yeah,
simulation
exactly.
theory.
Yeah, go on though.
But like, if you were to, because the whole point of video games, I think, to some extent, is escapism. You're playing a game to have fun and kind of escape the harshness of reality, whether you had a bad day or you just want to relax and have some fun. You can play a game. You can also read a book or watch a movie, which it's its own medium. But today we're talking about games. So games, there's a bit of escapism. When you play a Miyazaki game, it's very good that you use the word simulation, because that's really one of the most honest games out there. Because when you play as the character, there is almost no cutscenes, there's no arrows, there's no button prompts, there's none of that. It's literally, they teach you how to play the game, throw you into the world, and now it's your time to go on an adventure. And what can happen, which is why these games are known as hard, is there's no telegraphs. There's nothing to like prepare you for what's about to happen. You just have to go in like a real adventure. When you're a real adventurer, you don't just charge in, right? You don't just like run into like a pit of snakes or a dragon or goblins, or you don't just die, essentially throw your life away doing that. In a lot of
Hmm.
games, you play as kind of an overpowered character who just, even if you get surrounded, you kind of just one shot everyone or just outskill them because
Yeah, yeah.
you're the player. That's how it's supposed to be. But if you do that in a Miyazaki game, you're dead, because there's no mercy. There's no like, the enemies don't just stand around waiting for you to attack or waiting for you to counterattack. It's literally, if you walk into a mob, you're surrounded and they're all attacking you at the same time, and you're gonna die. And that was what was so refreshing, was because it really made the player think like an adventure. It really puts you in the shoes of the person like walking into this castle or walking into a poison swamp. It's like, what would you do in this situation? Versus, let's go back to Horizon Forbidden West, or Horizon Zero Dawn, the game before that. So I played Horizon Zero Dawn. I didn't play Forbidden West yet. And it's a really good game. It's an exquisite game. But it definitely is more cinematic, which I mentioned earlier. A lot of AAA games seem to be leaning towards. And it's guilty of like everything that Miyazaki's game Elden Ring is not guilty of. There's an arrow pointing you where to go. It says press X to shoot. It's like, it tells you at the bottom, go to this person in this city. In Elden Ring, they don't tell you anything. They're just like, you'll talk to someone and they'll say like, you must go to the place. And it's your responsibility to remember that. It's your responsibility to be like, okay, this NPC, this person in this place said, if I want my goal, I have to go here. And she told me where is here, so let's go. That's, before GPS and the internet, that was kind of like how a human being would have to do it.
Yeah.
Remember when you had to like ask for directions? Crazy, right?
Remember MapQuest?
And that was what was so refreshing about the Miyazaki games, is they treated you like a person, not just like someone who's just going around and just completely dominating the game. They treat you like an actual like competent person who is capable of decision making, who's capable of remembering, who's capable of problem solving. In modern games, the either you'll get a hint as to how to solve a problem, or the character will like repeatedly say, it's like, I wonder what happens if I like touch that rock or something. And it's just, I guess your answer at the beginning I think was just perfect, because you said it depends, and it really does. And like I said, I don't want to shame these directors or talk ill. We are the Stay Positive podcast. It would be completely hypocritical if I just started laying down the smack talk. But
Yeah.
I do think that people like this should be more open-minded and more understanding that not everything needs to be literally the same thing. Like, not every game needs to literally be almost a carbon copy of the previous games. They can do their own thing, and it could still be good in its own way, versus just copying all the rest,
Yeah, I understand completely. And this once again brings me back to what I said. It really depends on what said game is trying to accomplish. Because ultimately, the way I see games is you're not supposed to, at least traditionally, what I always thought of for games is you're not supposed to make it easy for someone to do what they got to do to get to beat the game, right? It doesn't matter.
Because that's a movie. That's just a movie at that point.
Exactly. So the cinematic gameplay, I don't know anything about it other than the one thing I watched, and I'm sure it's a trend because people prefer to be immersed in a story and, like I said, to be entertained. So this is the entertainment value of games now diverging from the original, we'll say, starting point. And ultimately, we'll find out that I think the one where entertainment value in terms of a story becomes more prevalent than the counter, because a lot of people nowadays also they tend to want to be spoon-fed their stuff. They don't want to work for it in a way. And I mean, I don't like that, but it's no joke that most people feel entitled
more than before.
And so yeah, so I don't see why this is a trend that will go away, but I know for sure that if I was going to be creating a game, for instance, I wouldn't want to make the rules so that someone could just beat it and say, oh, okay, on to the next. Because that's also what gives something its stickiness. It needs to be something that people can people can consistently go back to and visit and think, oh, okay, I want to beat this, or I want to perform this action.
100%. In the gaming world, that's called replayability, to play the game again, because it was fun the first time, so let's do it again. When you watch a movie, unless you're like a movie critic, I don't think, especially modern movies now, I don't think most modern movies are even worth a rewatch. But games, anything could happen, within the programming, of course, but, anything could happen. And I think, back to what you said way earlier, I think it depends on what you, like, who you want to make the game for. If you want to make the game for, like, little kids or, like, teenagers, then make it easier. If you want to make it more accessible, then yeah, you can create multiple modes. But I think it's this mentality that, oh, a game that's hard, and there's no option, it just is hard. Like, the fact that some people say that shouldn't exist, I think, is anti-art. Like, how dare you say, like, this game can't exist?
Yeah.
It's just like, no one's stopping you from making the game you want, but they can make the game how they want. If you don't like that game, 100%, you are totally within your right. You don't need to play it, you don't need to buy it, you don't need to like it. But if I like it, because it does satisfy a certain experience that I'm looking for, then I'll buy it, and I'll play it, and I'll have fun. And you can sit there, play the game that you have fun with, and, live and let live, There's no right answer. The right answer is whatever the player wants. And I guess I have two questions I want to ask you. The first one is, because this is more broad to, like, products rather than just games, which is better, catering to an existing audience or trying to branch out and draw more people? What do you think is more important? Because I think that's like a really tough thing to master, because ideally you could retain your audience while introducing people, but that's really hard. That's a hard balance, I think.
So economics and capitalism tell us that growth is prioritized over anything. So it depends on the context, but in most context, you would want to figure out ways to branch out, because the assumption is already that you don't need to keep those people already using your product loyal because they've already used it once. It depends on the product, of course. If it's a subscription product, for instance, and they're using it consistently, let's say they subscribed for a yearly membership or a monthly membership and they've been on it for a year, odds are they're not going to drop it like this. So you can rely on, with a certain degree of certainty, that they will be loyal. Now, to grow, you have to expand into other avenues, and that means finding new potential customers. So when I say it depends on the context, I really say that the prioritization for most companies, as soon as they've saturated their target market, or as soon as they've achieved a product market fit, and this applies to startups mostly, but once they've done that, the goal is growth, as fast as possible, as wide as possible. It's really about horizontal integration
Expansion.
at the end of the day. Exactly.
Okay.
I mean,
I guess
that's one thing. So in the context of games now, I don't know where you could tell me, but I don't know where this applies as much, because games are very pigeonholed with their programming. Once again, you said it before. Then there's a amazing possibility to do things as limited by those who programmed it. So whether you're trying to create more based off of a franchise, that could be a potential to expand into other regions of the market, but I don't know how that pertains to the idea of a game, once again, being either a storytelling movie or something that you need to try to beat.
Yeah. With games, it's hard making sequels or follow-ups, because you run the risk of, if you make it different from what the original game was like, the original fans are going to be like, what is this? I wanted more of the same. But if you make it the same, you run the risk of staleness. You run the risk of like, oh, I've seen this before. So it's like there's such an intricate dynamic between release date, between refinement, between innovation, between all that stuff. But I guess even when you said, so economically it makes sense to expand, to attract as much people as you want, which, it makes sense, right? Because at the end of the day, while I do treat video games as an art, it is a business making these games. They need to make money to sustain themselves, to make more games. But even you said, when you branch out, when you're trying to expand, you make the assumption your fans will be loyal. You assume, they'll stay here with me because they've been here with me the whole time. That's a very strong assumption, because if you delve too far down in a different direction, those original fans that got you started, they might jump ship and say, this isn't what I originally fell in love with, so goodbye, I'm going to take my business elsewhere. It's very fascinating, I'd say, because there's just so many different factors all into one thing. But I guess, and as a business, I get it. You want to make money, but if this pattern continues, if you just keep like generalizing and generalizing and generalizing, you end up creating a product that like everyone likes but no one loves. And that's assuming you keep making a good product. Like the second you mess up, oh boy, you're in trouble now. And thus starts like the downward spiral. So it's just one of those things where it's like so many different factors come into play when making a game. It makes it exciting, I'd say. Obviously I'm biased because I I'm very interested in game development, but there's just so much that goes into it. And but there's also those stories where like sticking to your guns actually does pan out. So, because for example, here's a little history lesson. The original game Miyazaki made, Demon Souls, when that game was made, it was designed to be a failure. The game that started it all, this whole series, his whole success story, with the first game, when the original publishers, they were looking at what he had so far, they said, we don't think this is going to sell well because it's so hard. It's like, it's difficult, it's vague, there's no maps. Basically they were saying, it's like, it's not like the other games that are actually selling well. So this game, it won't sell well. This sucks. But then, by some miracle, they decided to just let the project keep going until it's finished, just counting it as a loss, and that's that. It's with that mentality, it sounds like a negative mentality to assume failure, but when you assume that you're going to fail, it gives you kind of a liberty to just try anything you want. Just make the experience that you want. And Miyazaki did that. He made the game how he felt, and all of a sudden, they released the game, and it sold way more than anticipated. And the original publisher, Sony, so they own Demon Souls, unfortunately, so only PlayStation people get to play that. But the original guy, the producer, he ate his words. He was like, I was wrong. I was wrong. This was a really good game. And Miyazaki moved on, so now I think the publisher is Bandai Namco. I could be wrong, but I believe that's the one that released Dark Souls. And Dark Souls became a cultural phenomenon. Everything game-related was tied to Dark Souls. And that brings me to Elden Ring. Elden Ring at some point in the last week had almost 1 million players playing at the same time. So I really want people to understand what that means. It means that 1 million different people were playing at one time. That doesn't mean only 1 million people bought the game. That means at its peak, and that's on Steam, on the computer, not on the consoles, just on the computer. So 1 million, almost 1 million, like 950,000 were playing the game concurrently. And it's such like a dream story, starting from basically a failure to subcultural phenomenon, to the point where you're working with the Game of Thrones guy. Like, that's a success story and a half if I've ever seen. And I don't know, it's just one of those things where sometimes, while it does, economically speaking, branching out and catering to the lowest common denominator is the safe thing, it's the thing you should be doing, sometimes it pays to form your identity, to just be the best you can be, and do your best, try hard, put everything you have into it. It's not a rule that you will succeed, but there's no way you can't succeed unless you try that, unless you give it your all. And it's just one of those success stories that makes me smile. So I know, like you said, I know I've been talking a lot, but I agree that from a business standpoint, branching out and trying to capture as many people as you want is the goal. But sometimes just being the best at what you're good at, being the master of your craft rather than just being one of 1 million who all do the same thing, sometimes that pays out even more in the long run.
Well, in what Michael Porter would tell you, I'm also not a business student, but what Michael Porter would tell you is that one of the things in business to take into account is the threat of new entrants, this thing called barrier to entry. And if you are absolutely the best at what you do, that's great. But also, in a much more, not volatile, but in a much more competitive market where the barrier to entry is lower and a lot of people are doing something similar, value will still accrue to the person or group of companies that are doing it the best. Let's look at Apple. They make portable, tiny little earphones, and so many other companies do it. Sony, Bose, Bowers and Wilkins.
Raycons.
I could literally name 10 more. But who owns the market? Apple. Because, I mean, they have a lot of integration. The ecosystem is closed, yada, yada. I can name off 10 more reasons why. The point is, they have the market, and barrier to entry for companies that are already in audio is relatively low. It doesn't matter. So you honestly can meld those two statements that you said before, especially when it comes to business opportunities. Because games, I think they're a lot more, or the line is way, way, way finer for games because there are so many variables, and so it's just a different way to attack a business opportunity from my standpoint.
It's funny you bring up Apple though, and this is coming from a guy who, has his criticisms towards Apple, but Apple, correct me if I'm wrong, Apple, the iPhone was the first smartphone, right? Everyone else was like laughing at Steve Jobs. He was saying this is the stupidest thing in the world. He had to take that leap of faith. He could have been wrong. Maybe the smartphone was stupid and everyone would be like, this is dumb, doesn't work, the screen sucks, yada, yada, yada. He took that risk. He's like, no, this is the future. This is what people want. He had to trust himself and all his coworkers and all those people. Apple wouldn't exist if they didn't take that risk, if they didn't say, everyone's doing these, what was it, BlackBerry with the small
oh my god, yeah, the little rollers in the middle,
little rollers, the keypad, like the number pad that was like so small, and I was just thinking to myself, even as like a 10-year-old, I was like, how the heck am I supposed to type with this? It's so small. And then the iPhone came out, and it wasn't even that good, like in hindsight, but it was so new and it was so refined at the time, and it stuck to its identity so strongly. And Steve Jobs was a phenomenal entrepreneur and charismatic person. It sold well. I think, I'm taking artificial intelligence right now, and there's this concept of exploration versus exploitation. And I think like, to a certain extent, that's kind of like this. It's like, if you find a successful thing, you want to exploit it. You want to just keep making money doing the same thing. But sometimes you'll make even more money in a different path if you do something else. That's where you have to explore. You run the risk of finding a reward, or you're finding a result that's not as good as what you were doing. But sometimes you might find a result even greater than before. I think like a month or two ago, we were having a conversation and you said something along the lines of companies, especially with like older employees, they kind of fail to adapt. They fail to learn and adapt to current markets, which makes them stagnate, which makes them eventually die off in the future. You have to adapt to your environment. And I think, while it's not a one-to-one exact, I do think that you can't just do the same thing for 50 years. Things change, and when they change, you have to change with it or run the risk of becoming obsolete. And I think that's where like having an identity and having the boldness to like do something unique that no one else does, I think really pays off. And now that I'm saying this stuff out loud, I think to a certain extent, Miyazaki's success was almost like a byproduct of how oversaturated these easy games are. Like, think about it. If every game is easy and they all blend together as like the same thing, the first time you see a hard game, it's like, whoa, what is this? I've never played a game like this before, or it's been like 20 years, 30 years since a game was like this. So it's like, and then people start playing it, and some people hated it because they're not good or they're just impatient. But you can literally see the popularity like skyrocket almost exponentially, to the point that you're working with Game of Thrones author, like another subcultural icon. It's just like, I don't know, it's beautiful, which makes it ironic, kind of like, that this is pure speculation, but I think that does make sense that like, if all the games are easy, the one hard game stood out and everyone kind of slowly but surely went towards that direction. So that, that's funny that I say it like that. But so I think we've touched upon the whole catering to an audience versus trying to get the most amount of people. So here's my second question to you. And
Wait, before we go to your second question,
okay.
though, I do have a question for you.
Okay, yeah.
Because we both know that the way to make it, not make it, but the trend that's been really, really normalized in business is just repackage something and ship it. Like you want to basically be doing something that everybody already is doing to a certain extent. So it's not even about doing the same stuff that you've done in the past. It's about doing the same stuff that your competitors are doing right now. It is just market forces, right? My question for you is, in gaming, is it more successful, or what is the exploration versus exploitation dichotomy like in games? Do people find more success branching off into new ideas, or do they do better when sticking to their guns, both relative to their prior performance and relative to games that are similar to them?
I think that's a really good question, because some games, so way back when, like 10 or 20 years ago, sequels to games would come out a lot faster than now. Now games like AAA games, they take like 5 to 10 years to develop. Whereas before, like, there would be like annual releases. Like, they would literally release 1, 2, 3 back to back to back. And in the past, what I've seemed to notice is that, like, after the third game or fourth game, people start losing interest if you keep releasing games so fast, because sequels obviously have to be relatively similar to their predecessors. They can't just be completely different. But if you play 4 games that are all roughly the same, the attention of the gamer is like, yeah, it's good, but like, I've seen it before, I don't want this anymore. So so they'll lean towards something else. As for exploration versus exploitation, or like basically in video games, I think there are things like trends. There are trendsetters. So in the late 90s, there were games called 3D platformers, and those existed because Mario existed, Super Mario for Nintendo. You're laughing, but like, at the time, it was revolutionary 3D graphics, and when Mario was like the first that did it perfectly, everyone was like, oh shoot, now we gotta do it perfectly, and so many games tried to copy or make a variation of how Mario did it. And then the next thing was making like edgy games, making dark games in the early 2000s, as it were. So a lot of games were like, they had a lot of punk personality. They had that skater, I guess that's like more 90s, but like
rebellious.
Yeah, rebellious, edgy, rebellious, like attitude, like that kind of thing. Yeah. And there were a lot of games that, not exact copies of each other, but the tone was kind of consistent. And in the mid 2000s, late 2000s, there were first person shooters. And this spawned because of Call of Duty Modern Warfare. I'm sure you've heard of Call of Duty.
Yeah, of course.
And there are so many. Talk about oversaturated, right? That was oversaturated. Every game was a first-person shooter. Like, it was ridiculous.
Yeah.
But no one did it better than Call of Duty. Actually, maybe Battlefield 3, was almost as good. But the point is, when Call of Duty Modern Warfare came out, everyone needed to be a first-person shooter. Everyone. And what came after that? I think the next thing that came after was open world games. So games like Grand Theft Auto, you've heard of GTA. Mm-hmm. So GTA 4 and 5 were really good. And I think games just started like trying to copy that, make everything an open world, make it super big. And, and once again, who did it the best? The first one did it the best. GTA, the Red Deads, the ones that started it did it the best and sold the most copies. Everyone else, I won't say they were bad games, but they were not as good. And currently, right now, it's Battle Royale. So I'm sure you've heard of this. Do you know what Fortnite is? Of course,
I could. I mean, Warzone. There was another one that was the original. Who can forget Fortnite?
Fortnite, yeah. So it's funny you say that, because do you know what the first Battle Royale game was?
That's the one I was referencing. I just don't remember the name.
PUBG.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But that was an indie game. That was a game made by like one guy almost.
Really?
Yeah.
What a joke.
Can you imagine that? Can you imagine like an entire industry spawned because one guy just like made it? And I don't want to say PUBG is bad because one, I haven't played it because I almost passionately refuse to play battle royale games. But
I mean, to be fair, have you ever heard of Satoshi Nakamoto?
yeah.
No, I'm just kidding. I'm trolling you. Go on.
No, but like I think that's a good non-game example. It's like Satoshi, he made Bitcoin. So it's like Bitcoin never existed before. Nothing like Bitcoin existed before. He spawned a whole new, like, he's not the first to discover blockchain technology, but he was one of the first to like really implemented it into the real world. And
Yeah.
everyone tried to copy him, or not copy him, but like they looked at his technology and said, "Oh, we can do stuff with this technology too." And then Ethereum came along, and then a million others came along.
And the analogy works great because also, in terms of the same game, playing the game of store of value, the original still does it the best. It will always do it the best. I don't think that there can be any other token or any other cryptocurrency in the future that would ever do it better than Bitcoin for that purpose.
I mean, in video games, that's not a definitive rule, but typically, yeah, the first one who shows up to the party to do it well is going to be like the breadwinner, is going to be the one that just takes over and makes a name for themselves, and everyone else is just going to be a clone of that one.
Yeah.
So what was the original question? The question was the exploration. Is it worth companies exploring? It frustrates me a little bit because there are games that profit not from means that I think are ethical, but they do profit nonetheless. I'm referring to FIFA, that soccer game.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, I know. Yeah, and you told me why it's unethical already as
the
well.
loot boxes, yeah, we have a whole episode. Yeah. Go listen to that one. But basically, especially recently, like FIFA 2022, right? You would think that the banner in the game would be 2022 because that's the year it's supposed to be. It has 2021 on it. It literally is, and for those of you who don't understand what that means, it basically means it's almost an exact copy or very close to the previous game. So you said like repackaging, they literally just like took the same game, made maybe a few slight differences, put the number 22 on it and said, "Here you go, here's a brand new game." And I personally, even if that like financially that's brilliant, I don't think that will last long, because if you look like the sales for Electronic Arts games and the amount of controversies that just keep piling on is just getting so high to the point that like national governments from Europe and America are literally like going to court with them. So, I feel like it's only a matter of time before you just either self-destruct or you have to change what you're doing to do it more traditionally, less scummy. Obviously that's speculation. Maybe they did make a brand new game from scratch. Maybe. I doubt it. Most people doubt it. But, that is speculation. I'm not I don't work for Electronic Arts, but
that was a potential source of risk. So I mean, that's the dark side of the coin for the question that I asked. But I guess what I really want to know is what is rewarded more, exploration or exploitation?
I really think it comes in waves. I really do think it comes like there is no like definitive answer. I feel like every 5 years, every 5, 6, 7 years, there's that one game that took a risk and was like, and everyone just flocked to it and said, "This is amazing." And then every big company looks at that and they say, "Huh, people like this. Guys, stop what you're doing. We need to make a copy of this in our way. We have to because it's selling so well." And I kind of like this to a certain extent because in the early 2000s, like I said, people were copying Mario and people were copying like edgy stuff. So there was a lot of personality, like. And while there was like a similar theme or a similar style to it, they each like have their own unique spins to the concept, which, because they're competing against each other, they can't really make a full carbon copy. They have to do it something unique, because if they don't, why would I play this game when there's a better one over there? So,
Hmm.
this is like in the previous episode, I said competition really does kind of bring out the best in people, because it forces you to have to get good and make a product worth people's time. Because if you don't take it seriously, if you don't like actually put something fun or enjoyable in the game, why am I going to buy it? Why am I going to play this? So to your question, which is rewarded more? I think if I were to pick one, I think exploration. It's so hard. It's like taking the average between 0 and 100 versus 50 and 50. It's like it's the same average, but one time it's like risk averse versus risk taker. It really is like two sides of the same coin. You can't have one without the other. If no one ever took a risk, then we'd have the same thing over and over and over again, and nothing will change. But if we only take risks, we might not have like companies, from a business standpoint, from a consumer standpoint, that would be amazing. Just like have like 100 different games, that would be awesome. But the unfortunate thing is, my wallet is limited. I have to pick like maybe 5 games that I'm willing to buy at the time, and they're all competing against each other. So it's like, which ones do you buy? So it really is like a balance. Like, there has to be the game that like sells well, and then it has to run its course for like 5 years, and then a new thing has to show up. And I think that would be my final answer, is every 5 years it is best to not take risk, to just exploit what you have and just do what you're doing. And after like 5 or 6 years, then do something new. And put your all in it. Like, obviously do your best. Don't just produce something crappy, but like do something new, because people will get tired eventually of that stuff. So that's my final answer.
Fair enough. Lock it in. But now hit me with your question.
So my question, so this is to take a little bit of a sidestep. So back to the original tweets that started this whole episode. So they said they were making fun of how the game was so open, and so you can get lost, and you can be confused, and it's a game that was designed to be getting lost, and to some game designers that's a failure of game design, because there is a subsect of game philosophy that a gamer, someone who buys your game, should be almost entitled to finish the game. Like, you can't gatekeep the player from finishing. Obviously the game needs to be finishable. You can't just like not make the player finish. But like we've mentioned earlier, there's not like a definitive rule. If you want to make your game really hard and almost incompletable, that's 100% your choice. So I guess my question to you is a more philosophical question. And I 100% think I already know the answer, but I think it's worth asking and worth hearing. Which do you think is more rewarding? Figuring something out on your own, or being told how to do something?
Yeah, I remember, because this is what you sent me, and I was like, oh, what is he going to go down? What rabbit hole does he want to delve into here? I also think that this is literally an adaptive trait that humans need. I'm in camp, you got to figure it out on your own, without a shred of a doubt.
Right? It's more rewarding.
It's not even that it's more rewarding. It's literally what has allowed us to survive for these hundreds of thousands of years.
Exactly. I kind of had a feeling that's what you were going to say, but like, to these people, and I understand that like there's some toxic attitudes towards gaming. Like, some people will make fun of you for not completing a game. I don't think those people are worth any of your time. But not every game is for everyone. But the whole point of a game is to play it, is to figure out problems, is to solve puzzles, is to like learn skills. These are like, I don't want to sound too pedantic, because this is a video game we're talking about. This isn't like super insane, but like the skills you learn in a video game have a parallel to the skills you learn in real life. being the ability to master something takes time, just like mastering a sport or mastering a craft. That takes time. And in real life, you have to be careful, you have to be cautious. In some games, you can't just go blindly in. Well, some you can by design, but in this specific example with Elden Ring, you can't do that because then you'll just die. So you have to be careful. You have to take in your surroundings. You have to observe. You have to critically think. That's what this game allows the player to do. Other games, they don't allow you to figure stuff out. They don't allow you to explore. Well, they don't allow you to take in what you're seeing. Rather, they'll tell you what you're seeing. I think we use the analogy of going to the top of a mountain. What would we do? It's like, and I think all of us, well, me and you, we said we would take it in, because we just climbed a mountain. Yep. Now, obviously, I can't know the answer for this for sure, but I'm willing to bet that if you were carried up that mountain, like as in you didn't do the climbing, rather you were just brought to the top, I don't think you would appreciate it as much, like the beauty and the whole, like, gravitas of like being at the top of a mountain. I think a little bit of it will be lost in translation because you didn't climb that mountain. Someone carried you up there. And it's still a beautiful sight and you've reached a peak of sorts. But in my opinion, it's not a fulfilling accomplishment. And I think...
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And to be honest, I was talking about this with Zayam. It was basically... We were talking about Goggins and how after he did that 100-mile race, he broke his feet, and he was just in the worst shape you could ever be. And he was in the bathtub, blood and feces all over him. He's just a disaster of a human being at this point. But he didn't want to go to a hospital. He didn't want to go anywhere. He just wanted to stay there and enjoy the pain. Why? Because he put some part of himself into what got him there. No one carried him 100 laps around a 1-mile track. He did it himself, and he accomplished something. And that, I mean, yeah, it goes to the reward thing that you say, but I think higher level, it literally is something that we do for the purpose of surviving. We have to be able to experience things and learn from them, because otherwise, extinction.
You're right. I think that's one of the things I love about games the most, is that they can teach you these kind of things, even if it's supposed to be enjoyable and an escape of reality, it can like imbue these kind of lessons to you. And yes, I know that's a bit pedantic from a video game, but like, if it's done well, I think it's true.
No, but you see, here's the really interesting part. This is why simulation is so sexy. This is why VR... No, really. This is why VR and the idea of simulation are so sexy to the people that want to escape the need to have to do something, to be uncomfortable. It literally takes away the whole idea of your ability to mold yourself and, like I said, have to be uncomfortable. Because comfort is the one thing that we, funny enough, have developed also as a trait for survival. Because if something's uncomfortable, then
you have to change
something is uncomfortable. Yeah, you have to you got to change it so you can be comfortable again. Because if it's uncomfortable, that means it's a danger to your life.
Yeah.
But yeah, we see these trends happening, and I think that this trend only gets farther and farther in to what it could be, and that's why also people find simulation theory and just the idea of a simulation so
attractive,
existentially troubling.
Oh, yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah, but yeah, man, that's just my 2 cents on that.
Well, I greatly appreciate hearing it from a non-gamer. I think I really like this conversation. I think it's really interesting, and
yeah, for sure.
And with all that being said, whether you're dying 50 times to the same boss or you are contemplating simulation theory, there's only one thing you gotta do through it all, and that is to
stay positive.